It is Monday, January 29th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So, out of respect for those that are here with us live today, I'd like to officially start our meeting. Welcome to the first of what we do hope to be an ongoing quarterly series of fireside chats about women, peace, and security issues. My name is Dr. Karen Brigg. I am a past president of the Federation of Medical Women of Canada and a co-chair of the Federation's Women, Peace and Security, or WPS committee. Tonight, we are very pleased to have the chair of the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada with us to help set a foundational understanding of who and what their network is and where the Federation, and specifically the Federation's Women, Peace and Security Committee, fits in this. But before we get on with the show, I have a few points to share. First, a land acknowledgement. I would like to take a moment of time and just comment that I think most of us here are from Ottawa, although we could be from anywhere in Canada or even abroad. For Ottawa, the land on which we are based is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. We acknowledge the importance for us all to reflect on our history of whose land we are working, living, and playing on today. I also note, specifically being in Ottawa, the importance that we also keep in mind the many other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who are represented and live amongst us in Canada, especially often in urban settings. I encourage anyone participating live or listening to the recording to take a moment with us now and reflect on the importance of the work that we all have to do to further Canada in its ongoing efforts towards reconciliation with all of our Indigenous peoples. Some other logistics. We do hope that today's live meeting will be no more than 1 hour, including the question and answer section, which will happen at the end of our fireside chat today. We are recording this, so if you are with us live and you do need to step away, do not fear. You will be able to watch anything you miss on the recording later. Also, feel free to keep your camera off if not actually one of our speakers today. Feel free to submit your questions into the live chat as we go along, but we will only be addressing them after the fireside chat is done and our recording is stopped. So that is one of the perks you get for coming live to our meetings, that you will actually be able to answer and have your questions direct with our speakers after we finish our recording portion. It is our hope, as we continue on with these fireside chats, to increase our distribution of who comes to them, and hopefully anyone who is interested in these topics and wanting to learn more will be welcome to attend. Again, in recognition that we may have a diversity of backgrounds of who is actually listening to this recording in the future, let me take a moment now to just make sure everyone has some contexts on who we are and what we're doing here. If you are already a Federation member, but you're not a Women, Peace and Security Committee member, then please consider writing to the Federation's main office and ask to join the Federation's Women, Peace and Security Committee. If you are a Canadian woman physician or a medical learner, but you are not a Federation member, please consider going to our website, FMWC.ca, and signing up to become a full member. If you're a Canadian, but you're not a woman physician or a physician learner, but you still care deeply about women's health, women physicians, you too can still check out the Federation's website and look into becoming an associate member. If you are not Canadian, but you're still interested in women's health and supporting women physicians, please consider checking out the Medical Women International Association website, MWIA.net. And to everybody listening, I would be remiss to not do a small plug specifically to let you know now about a celebration that's coming up this September for recognition of the Federation's 100th year anniversary as an organization. That celebration will be happening at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier here in Ottawa, September 26th to 28th. Everyone's welcome to come join. So for more information, please again, go to the Federation's website. So that's a little bit about the Federation. One of the main activities the Federation's Women, Peace and Security Committee does is working together with an organization called the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada. We will be learning more about them shortly, as it's their chair that we're interviewing today. So, with that, we're going to move now into our next section, and I will meet you again at the end. But we are going to start our fireside chat. So I will be passing everything over now to my co-chair of the Federation of Medical Women of Canada's Women, Peace and Security Committee, Anne, to introduce herself and her exciting guest for us today. Anne.
Thank you so much, Karen. And it really is my pleasure to be part of not only the network, but part of this fireside chat and with our exciting guests. So my name is Anne Yetch, and as Karen said, I am co-chair for the FMWC's Women, Peace and Security Committee. In addition, I am a physician, I'm a pediatrician, and I am located here at McMaster Children's Hospital or in Hamilton. So I am working and living on the territories that are covered with the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And it is the lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. And it's my pleasure to be here. And in particular, it is my pleasure to introduce Beth, or should I say, Beth, I'm going to have you introduce yourself because we really want to get to know you. We really want to understand this role that you have. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this position.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thanks to Karen. And first off, congratulations to FMWC on 100 years. That's a real accomplishment. And congratulations on a century of hard work and a century that's seen a lot of changes in women's health, and I'm sure for women physicians as well. Oh, well, it's always hard when people say introduce, tell us a bit about yourself. So I guess what is perhaps most important to start with is that I have worked most of my career working on women's rights, on gender justice issues, primarily internationally. So I have advised UN organizations, development NGOs, Canadian government, other governments on how their international development assistance programs can support greater gender equality, greater gender justice, in specific programs, but also across different areas. So I consider myself very, very fortunate that I've been able to work on these issues. And for the last 7 years, I've been working with an organization called the Equality Fund. This is a Canadian-based organization that works globally, supporting and resourcing feminist organizations, women's rights organizations in the global South.
Oh, fascinating. You know, we have a lot of trainees who are part of the Federation. And I was struck by what you said that, you know, your initial work was with women's rights and women's justice issues. Can you tell us a little bit, how did you get involved in that? What was the path that led you into that area?
Well, first off, actually, it started way back in high school with Model United Nations. And it's interesting the kinds of choices we choose for extracurricular activities. So that was really the springboard to get interested in issues outside of Canada. And I studied political science and economics as an undergrad, as a graduate student. And I was reflecting that in my graduate studies, I did not have a single woman professor. That was back in the days. I don't even know, I'd have to go back and look whether we read anything written by women. So I certainly am of the generation where gender studies at university wasn't common. but I was very fortunate. I was living and working in Nicaragua in the 1980s. And it was a very interesting time because it was a time of great hope. It's changed dramatically since, but there were changes happening. There was a belief that land could be distributed more justly, that people had a right to learn to read, that that inequalities could be narrowed. And I had the real fortune to work with a number of women who were really committed that these changes would also be for women. And what they taught me in so many ways is that this wasn't going to happen automatically. That there's often, we talk about human rights, and there's an assumption that it's human rights for all, but really in practice, it doesn't always work out that way. And actually, I think there are some parallels in the little bit that I know about the medical profession. In fact, that we had so many drug trials that were done on male bodies, but they just assumed that the results were valid across the board, but they weren't. They didn't take women's particular biological needs into effect. And I think this is one of the things we've learned about history, that we're, as someone told me the other day, we're still building democracies for men. And we assume that the male experience is the general one, is the norm. And so I think this was one of the early lessons I learned from these absolutely dedicated activists, of the importance of advocacy, the importance of activism on the rights for women. And now in the last, 15 years, broadening that out to gender diverse people, that the voices that haven't been heard in shaping some of our main conversations are really important. And I think then it also became, this was really clear when we're talking about global conflict, that in many cases, the impact of war wasn't really understood on how it was different for women and girls. And globally, we're still at the point where women are not sitting around peace tables. And this is one of the things that's core at the Women, Peace and Security agenda, is that women have a right to be part of these discussions. And the research more and more is showing that when women and their organizations are part of conflict resolution processes, not only is it more likely that a resolution will be found, but it's also that the peace will be more durable. So when you bring in voices of people who haven't been involved to date, we could have very different outcomes. And I think it's really important to say, though, that it's not because women are more inherently peaceful. I think the research shows that that's not true. It's more that the experiences of being excluded, or the experiences of having different life trajectories, means that when women are involved, they often bring different perspectives to these discussions. Anyway, sorry, a long answer to your question, but hopefully that gives you a few insights into my particular journey.
Beth, that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I particularly love how you explained the role of women at the table and what we bring to the table. I think that is such an important concept for all of us to understand and to bring forth. It's so very valuable. And your journey, I think we could spend a long time just dissecting that journey. But you are now in a wonderful position. Tell us about your position now.
So I have the real privilege to chair the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada. This is a network that brings together over 80 organizations and individuals. So we're a very open space. It's that you can become a member as an individual or as an organization. And we're very grateful that the Federation of Medical Women of Canada is one of the organizational members. And the objective of this network is to monitor the Government of Canada's commitments or the implementation of their commitments on women, peace, and security. So since 2010, Canada has had a national action plan on women, peace, and security. So the government has said that it will do certain things to implement what's now called the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. And one of the things that's really clear, it's very easy for governments to put plans down on paper. It's much harder to actually follow through and do the implementation. So what we do as a network is we hold conversations with government. We do analysis of the different initiatives that they've undertaken, and we advocate for a really strong Canadian leadership on this issue. So what happened in the year 2000, the United Nations Security Council, so where all the global discussion or the formal global discussions on security happened, there was a really important resolution, and we use the number all the time, 1325. That was, they number the resolution sequentially. And this was a really important resolution by the UN at that time, because it said that women had a role, a right and a role in global security discussions. And that it was really important to look at the differential impact of armed conflict on women and men, because historically the impact of women had not been considered. And so as a result of that resolution, different governments, different states started to build out a series of commitments to change that, to take global action to rectify that situation. We're coming up to the 25th anniversary of that resolution. And unfortunately, the global consensus is that progress has been very, very slow in moving it. We're not seeing more women involved in peace negotiations. If you look there was a picture early on after the full-scale invasion of Russia by Russia of Ukraine. The picture was all men sitting around the table discussing what would happen. Women from Afghanistan were excluded from the talks in Doha that led to the American pullout of Afghanistan. So we're not seeing progress there. We're also not seeing progress. One of the other issues in the resolution, it was conflict-related sexual violence, rape as a weapon of war. And unfortunately, we're not seeing much progress on that either. It's still a major problem in different conflicts and other areas. And so what we do is we believe that it's consistent with Canadian values to be a strong leader on supporting the goals behind this resolution, making the investments, doing the advocacy to see that progress is made.
That's it's really amazing. As you outline that journey, I think about the changes that may have that WPS, Women's Peace and Security Network, has had over this time period and its influence. Can you comment a little bit on those aspects?
So since 2000, there have been 3 different iterations of organizations working on these issues in Canada. And so this network is the 3rd one. And we started very much as a kind of a ragtag group, meeting when we could, doing things on the sides of our desks of basically just people really wanting to see change and coming together. And a number of years ago, we were able to become more formal. We incorporated as a not-for-profit organization. We now have a formal structure with membership dues that allow us to do a little bit more. And we've been quite successful in our relationships with government. The 2nd National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security that was launched in 2017 recognize this, our network, as the main civil society voice on women, peace, and security. And so since then, we have co-chaired with Global Affairs Canada an advisory group on women, peace, and security. So we've now formalized the civil society government relationship, and this allows us to have regular conversations and dialogue and interact and make recommendations in a much more structured and formal way. So we've seen this more formalization, the recognition of the importance of the voices from civil society. And I think that's a real achievement that we've been able to make.
So do we, as an organization, have an understanding of those obstacles that are in place for women to actually meet that resolution of 1325? And are we in a position where we're advocating for those changes?
It's a really good question. And I think one of the strengths of what we call women, peace, and security is also one of the challenges. Partly, the agenda is very broad. It includes women in peace negotiations, as I've mentioned. It includes bringing a gender perspective to humanitarian response. So to refugee camps, making sure that the needs of refugee women are reflected in the planning. So very concretely, one of the recommendations that was made years ago is that latrines in refugee camps should have locks. Very basic, right? It's for your own security and protection, and that there should be private spaces to be able to wash menstrual supplies or that. Yet that's still not happening. It's not common practice in all refugee camps. So the agenda is very broad. We have members of the Federation who have been marvelous advocates for the health of women serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, and the health needs of women veterans here in Canada. There's also people in our network who are advocates for women human rights defenders outside of Canada and coming to Canada, women who stand up and have put themselves in danger because they're speaking out for either rights or democracy or against a Canadian mining company that is polluting the water near their town. So it's a very broad agenda, which allows us to talk about all kinds of issues related to security, related to defense, related to Canada's role in the world. At the same time, that's also challenging, because then there are different factors that we have to be aware of in all these different areas. I think one of the major ones is still this idea. One of the cores of the women, peace, and security agenda is that we need to rethink what makes us secure. At its core, it's a peace agenda. And so often when we talk about security, people immediately gravitate to military security. And so there are advocates to spend more on defense, to buy the latest helicopters, to resort to military solutions to conflict as the first resort. And one of the things in the women, peace, and security agenda is to say, actually, we need to have a broader understanding of security. And I think that argument or insight is much more evident now in a post, where I don't think we're quite post-COVID, but given COVID, right? That spending hundreds of millions of dollars on defense did not stop COVID and won't stop the next pandemic. And yet that's a huge threat to our security as Canadians. Climate change is a huge threat. The environmental damage is a huge threat to our security as people. And I think healthcare professionals really understand that kind of more holistic notion of security. And I think that's still, even though those insights may be obvious to you or to me, there's still the minority view when we're talking foreign policy, when we're talking, defense spending, and when we're talking national security. So I think that's a huge obstacle, that we still have to have more diverse voices heard when we're talking about foreign policy, when we're talking about Canada's interests in the world.
One of the things that our federation's mandate includes is that to support women's health. And you've already touched on some of the women's health issues, right? And I'm wondering if you're thinking about in the recent past or what you predict even going forward, what do you see as some specific women's health issues or concerns that you've come across in WPS that you think there could potentially even be a role for women physicians or for our federation's involvement?
I think there are so many health dimensions in the women, peace, and security agenda, partly because it's drawing attention to the differential impacts of armed conflict on women and men and gender diverse people. And we know that war is very, very gendered, to use that language, right? It's men who tend to be the vast majority of soldiers. We know that the calls to fight are often appeals to masculinity, right? Are you man enough? You're not a true man unless you defend your country. And then also what happens during war. We know that sexual violence is commonplace in all conflicts. We know that women are the vast majority of survivors of sexual violence and conflict. We don't know enough about what happens to men, but we do know that men make up. The estimate is anywhere between 7 and 12% of survivors of sexual violence in conflict. So there's also health issues there. We know that armed conflict destroys the fabric of society. So tasks like caring for elders, caring for children, preparing food fall to women, and that also has an impact on their health. Mental health during armed conflict has huge implications for all those involved. We talk about the trauma of generations, and that's something this is getting more and more attention. But you can imagine young boys, young girls living through different conflicts and how that will have implications. And we know in many cases during armed conflict, it's women's health that is underserviced or under provided for. So women don't stop having babies during a natural disaster or during conflict, yet medical support, medical attention for reproductive health care can be very difficult to obtain or to provide. We also know about the medical or the health implications of different weapon systems, and about the threat of nuclear testing. Nuclear weapons has differential impact on women's and men's health from the evidence. And another health issue that I've seen is when we welcome refugees from conflict affected countries. Quite often the women refugees have trouble accessing appropriate healthcare that meets their holistic needs, that meets the mental health needs to help them deal with the trauma that they've that they've lived through when they've escaped the conflict. So then even inside Canada, we're seeing the implications of health needs on refugees. Those are a few of the many health implications or sides of the women, peace, and security agenda that I've seen.
Thank you for peeling those layers, because I think, there's sometimes a lack of the appreciation of all of how the complexity of this issue, right? And if we don't dissect those issues and really understand the words and the language and what we mean by security, uh, we miss the boat here. And so that this is a really, really important discussion. I really appreciate that. The other thing that I'm very aware is our federation has this mandate to support women physicians and leadership. And so I wonder, you are a clear leader here, and can you share with us any pearls about women in leadership position? Why is it still so hard for so many women to step into leadership positions?
It's a good question, huh? And I think when we need to talk more about, I think, I think one is that we still, it's still important for us to redefine what a leader looks like and how a leader acts.
Mm.
And I remember being so, having such a emotional reaction to Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand when she said, a leader can show emotion, a leader can show empathy, that's not a sign of weakness. And I think that's one thing that we need to um, live into that more and applaud that when it happens, that a leader doesn't have to stand there with a stiff upper lip and have this very masculine vision of what strength is, right? Like, it's strong to show emotion. I think the other thing, quite frankly, we have to do as well is that we really have to look at the growing abuse and threats and attacks on women leaders. We may not experience it in all levels, but I think when some women see the attacks that happen to women politicians or women who dare to speak out, what happens to them online, what happens to women journalists when they start reporting on certain things, that says, well, maybe I'm not going to take a leadership position in this other area because it could happen to me too. So I think we really have to start looking at tech, the regulation of tech. We have to look at cyberbullying. We have to look at online violence. And we have to look at the attitudes that says this is okay, and we have to say no, it's not okay. And I think that we also have to support women leaders, right? I think I have lots of trouble with some of the things that Madeleine Albright, the American politician, did and said, but she has that fabulous quote, that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And and I think that's also really important, that, and maybe it relates to the first one, but that we are so much stronger together. And when we work together, when we support each other, when we open doors for others, when we open, when we show solidarity, when we work together, that is, to me, a different form of leadership rather than stepping on people to get ahead or closing the door shut behind you just because you've made it into a particular space or room.
Yeah, it's so important, right, that we support each other in our leadership positions. And it really brings up that whole perspective of having critical conversations with one another and not being afraid to have those critical conversations, because we don't always have to like what we have to say or what somebody has to say, but we should be able to engage in a discussion and still move the agenda forward. But that means that we have to really work together and have that overall vision that we're working towards, and keep that big picture always in mind, which is so important. Now, Beth, many, not all of our audience will be women physicians, given the nature of our organization. But if they wanted to learn more about WPS, what would you encourage them to do as a next step?
Well, I think too, if you're part of the federation, to get involved in your committee, I think that that's one. I also think that given that the Federation is a member of the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada, you're all welcome to come to our meetings, to check out our website, to get involved in some of our activities. The other thing, more generally, I think just get involved in foreign policy discussions. I think that we have to break this idea that Canada's foreign policy is only for the foreign policy wonks. It's only for the, you know, the people that the National calls up to comment on what's happening in Armenia, right? No, it's our country. We have, you know, our voices matter in terms of what we think Canada's role in the world should be. It's really interesting, and when Canadians are asked how much does Canada spend on development assistance, people overestimate it all the time by a factor of 10 or more. They think we're spending way, way, way more on development assistance than we really are. And in fact, our development assistance spending is only slightly above all-time lows of what. So we have this feeling sometimes that Canada is this very generous international leader, yet really we're not doing very well on a number of counts. So if we think that Canada should be involved in supporting women's reproductive health around the world and health and rights, then that's something we have to stand up and say that, yes, we think that that's important. So I think being involved, being an active citizen in talking about foreign policy decisions is also something that's important to do.
So many of our listeners may not be very aware about when you use the word developmental assistance. So what are the components? What exactly does that involve?
So as a like most countries based in the global north, we have aid, you know, that Canada contributes to different United Nations organizations like the World Health Organization, or like the UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund. We also support the Canadian government has programs that Canadian organizations work with partners in other countries to implement. So that may be a project to support clean water for a particular community, or it could be an initiative to monitor elections to make sure they're fair, or it could be to support a women's credit and loan program, or the Equality Fund where I work. We received money from the Canadian government, and we support women-led women's rights organizations that push their own government to change laws, or that work on various issues. So it's that when we're talking about international assistance or development assistance, that people might know it more as foreign aid, but it's something that our government does. It's one of the places our taxes go to.
So if we want to get more information, if our members are really wanting to understand more about foreign policy, would you recommend a specific podcast, a specific book to get people up to speed? What would you suggest?
That's a tough one. I think an older book, so not to get you up to speed, but one that was really, really important to me. And it's older, but it's written in a very easy to understand style. And it's called Bananas, Beaches, and Bases.
Mm.
And it's by Cynthia Enloe, Enloe. And she writes about how militarization seeps into our everyday life. And so she
Mm.
talks about it through these case studies of how bananas are marketed, how tourism, that's the beaches, tourism also runs on militarism in different areas. And then the bases, of course, are the bases. She's this marvelous thinker, and I just bought her latest book. It's like 10 lessons on war for feminists or something like that. She's this very, very interesting writer, that very accessible, but bringing a feminist approach, asking feminist questions about war and international relations. So that would be something on just one element that I'd recommend.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful for us. Now I see Karen has joined us, so I'm feeling like we're coming to an end, although Beth, I must say, what a fascinating work life you have, but how it all has come together from your studies and all your life experiences, and it's culminated to this. So what's next for you, Beth?
I don't know. So we'll have to see. I think, I still have some years left in me. So I think I'm still going to continue to advocate on this. As I said, it's an unfinished agenda. Yeah. We still have lots of work to do. We have work to better understand what the issues are. We have work to bring more politicians on board. We have work globally to really ask some of these questions about why is global military spending it's at all-time highs, and this year is going to be through the roof again. Yet we still have trouble finding money for healthcare, clean water, but we have lots of can spend it on other things. So I think the agenda is still ongoing, and there's lots of work to do. So I thank you, I thank Karen, and I thank the Federation Medical Women of Canada for your walking with us in these important discussions.
Well, thank you so much, Beth.
My pleasure. Thanks, Anne.
As I think I'm the timekeeper here, we did promise that we would try and keep our recording to be around that 45 minutes. Clearly, we can easily do a part 2 with Beth, who has huge amounts of information that she can share with all of us. I was just overwhelmed of how much I still even learned by just listening to the two of you. So I almost can guarantee that at some point in the future, maybe we can do a part 2 with Beth. I want to take this moment to thank everyone who's been attending live, and also everyone who's taken the time out of their schedule to be listening to this recording. I'm sure everybody can agree with me in wanting to thank Anne and Beth, and I'll introduce another person, our Women, Peace and Security Canada Network Coordinator, Monique, for all of your time and efforts to make this happen today. You all have given us so much to think about, but I'm hoping that this little journey and fireside chat today, everyone has learned a little bit more about the Federation, the Women, Peace and Security Committee of the Federation, and has some ideas now of how we work together with the Women, Peace and Security Network. And hopefully you're a bit more curious to learn more and get more involved. Before we formally close out our recording, I do encourage those that are here live to stay. We will continue with a Q&A when we finish our recording. But before we go, I wanted to just quickly do a round robin in case anyone has any last comments or suggestions, and for Monique to be able to introduce herself. So maybe we'll start with Monique.
Thank you. I don't have anything more to add. I thought that was a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much, Anne and Beth, for that. And I am Monique. I am the coordinator of the Women, Peace and Security Network.
Beth, any last thoughts?
No, just thanks to everyone for pulling this together. And I think one of the really interesting pieces of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as I was saying, is that it brings a lot of diverse perspectives, a lot of diverse issues. And it's a really important conversation to have. So thanks.
What's going through my head at this moment, but just what amazing work that the Women, Peace and Security Network has engaged in. And you've really, Beth, opened our eyes to just the various layers, the complexity of these issues. And one can understand why that continued advocacy must prevail, because it's about developing that understanding so more and more people can have that understanding and move and shift these agendas and be more curious, ask more questions. Otherwise, otherwise we will become stagnant at the status quo, which is not a good place to be. So thank you for all the work that this organization has done. Truly amazing.
I will leave everyone who's listening with one other suggestion. There was the question earlier on where else can people go? What else can they learn about? And one of the things that came to my mind was a recent journal article in The Lancet. It was published September 6, 2023, and it's called The Lancet Commission on Peaceful Societies Through Health Equity and Gender Equity. I personally found there was a whole pile of things I knew, but I had never put it together in this way. And it helped me reframe a lot of my thinking in these areas. And ironically enough, when I found it from The Lancet and thought, how amazing, I looked at the first author, and not only is it a Canadian, but it's someone from Ottawa. So Valerie Percival. I've heard of her, but I haven't met her. So again, maybe sometime in the future, she can also be someone that we interview. But that's it. We're at a wrap. We do hope to continue doing these about once a quarter, and that we would hope next time we'll pick another group or association that also is part of Women, Peace and Security Network, so that we can all learn more about who does what where, and hopefully find synergy, find other groups that are like-minded or doing work. So whether it's us donating money, donating time, getting involved, learning more about these complicated, wicked problems that are impacting all of us. So unless there's any last words, we'll say it's a wrap until our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.